Hello children, welcome to my first video lecture on ISC poems, and today I thought of discussing a very important poem as far as 2021 ISC is concerned. Today we are going to try and understand Birches by Robert Frost. Now if you look at the poem, this poet Robert Frost, he is known as a nature poet, right? And Robert Frost is famous for all his nature poems, and he is regarded as one of the most prominent and popular poets of his times. So what about this poem, Birches? Now, Robert Frost's Birches is one of the most anthological nature lyrics of Frost. Now, what are birches? Birches are forest trees with soft and slender, very flexible branches that can easily, swing down and up. And it's a very, very common sight in New England. Frost, he watches the bent down branches of the birches, and he comes to imagine that some boy might have resorted to birch swinging, and that is the reason why the branches are bent. But he also wants to imagine that these branches of birches are bent because of the load of ice after a snowstorm. He goes on to describe the scene in detail in the poem. And then the poet recalls how the rural boys swing birches in their spare time. And while being a child, Frost also enjoyed going up and down on a birch when he was a child, of course. And he wants to do the boy's act of swinging on these trees yet again. And why does he do so? This is where the symbolism comes into play. Frost, who was young once upon a time, now he is a grown-up man, burdened with the responsibilities of life. And the swinging on the birches will act as a distraction. It will act as, a vehicle on which he can go away from the mundane and cliched activities of earth. And that's why this poem's message is that we should do our duty on earth, but at the same time, we should not stop aspiring for higher and noble ideals. Now, this distraction is described as the higher and noble ideals because this distraction, it takes you towards divinity. It takes you towards God. It takes you towards the world of spiritualism. Now, if you look at the poem, this poem is open to various interpretations. It brings together such contraries as fact and fancy, reality and imagination, heaven and earth. Now, on many lines, we can summarize the poem. First of all, what do we see? We see a bent down birch tree, or, a group of birches together, bent down. And when the poet sees birches bent down after a snowstorm, he imagines that some boy must have bent them. And then he also notices that the branches are bent because of the load of ice, as they cannot be bent down permanently by the swinging of the boys. And then very beautifully, the poem describes a sunny winter morning. And when it stops raining, the branches of birches are covered with ice. And on a sunny winter morning, the ice on these branches begin to shine and reflect 7 colors of the rainbow as the sunlight passes through the ice. And the warmth of the sun increases. It falls on earth while the the ice around the trees, they crack and they open, and these small pieces of ice thrown on the earth appear to be the pieces of broken glass, as if the inner dome of heaven has fallen. Now, over here you have to understand the reference of inner dome of heaven has fallen is a most wonderful way, the poet gives shape to his imagination. Now, it's quite biblical in reference. Inner dome, the sky happens to be, the dome that we are talking about. And the sky or the dome in the poem is a separation. It is a separating dome which separates the earth from heaven. And if the dome is broken, you actually enter the vicinity of heaven. So the poet thinks that climbing up the branches of the birches will take him close to the dome of heaven. And then there is this scene of birches and the branches of the birches which are bent. Frost says that the branches are sometimes so soft and they come down to the level of dry fern growing on the earth. They bend down so much, but they don't get broken. But they remain bowed down for such a long time that they do not straighten up themselves. And then comes the fanciful idea of the poem. The speaker, he describes birches bowed down with the load of ice. And at once he has a fanciful idea. He begins to imagine that some boy might have climbed and bent the birches down. The boy who lived far away from town to learn and play urban games like baseball, he might have devised this game, the game of swinging birches, which he could play all alone. He doesn't need a company for that. This boy might have climbed all the birches owned by his father, and he might have bent them down one by one. And all the branches, they become limp and none could stand erect. No tree was left unconquered and bent by the boy. This gives a boost to poet's imagination. And in a reminiscent mood, he goes back to his childhood. It's a perfect nostalgia. The speaker, he recalls the time when he himself was a swinger of birches. And he feels that he could take to birch swinging once again, particularly when he's tired of his musings and he would like to be lifted away from the earth to the branch of some birch tree. So over here, you can see a transition happening, although it is happening in fantasy, in the world of imagination, but there is a transition to and from, transition towards heaven from earth and then again coming back. So this act as a balance between the two worlds. The speaker, he makes it very, very categoric that his desire to escape from the troubles of going up on a branch of birch, it does not mean that he does not want to return. Going up is temporary and it is as desirable as coming down. And the bottom line is when the poet says that earth is a desirable place to live in the spirit of love. And a man does not like to be a swinger of birches and live in the two worlds of facts and fantasy. You cannot have two legs on different boats and think of going sailing. It is not possible. You have to choose one at a time. And that's why he says that his going away from the world should not be looked upon as somebody who is trying to run away from his duty. In fact, he should be regarded as a man worse than a swinger of birches, which means you should have respect for him, right? He is not an escapist and he has his plans to come back to earth. So, this momentary escape from the troubles of the earth, the poet imagines his primary objective is to return to enjoy all the charms it provides. So, here we are reminded of again Keats' similar desire in his one of his poems, John Keats' desire in one of his poems, that is Ode to a Nightingale, that even when we escape from our troubles, we should keep in mind Keats' message that poetry of earth is never dead. And that is what Frost wants us to remember in our troubled times. Now, if you look at the title of the poem, The Birches, the title is very, very apt and suggestive. And this title has been used as a central metaphor for the main theme of the poem. You see? And it is a symbol of escaping from harsh realities of the world into the world of imagination and fantasy. And it is also a symbol of higher human ideals and aspirations, right? The way you approach divinity, the way you approach God, right? It is also a symbol of coming down on earth, which means you are accepting reality and you are ready to do all earthly activities. So, this going up and coming down are both desirable, and man must attain a balance between his work on earth and his spiritual aspirations. Thank you. And for detailed notes and analysis, you can join my online classes. You can contact me on 9775142025 for detailed analysis of stories, Shakespeare, and of course, English language. Thank you. Take care and stay safe. Bye bye.